Today, Judge Mark Marion described McCorriston's offences as extreme and unprovoked as he sentenced him to 8 years and 6 months behind bars. The earliest he'll be eligible to apply for release is July 2024.
So we finally have it at last. As Samantha Pote on NBN News Newcastle reported there, 8.5 years. Earliest release, middle of 2024, about 3 years. Though there has been a lot more revealed in recent media reports than was reported by NBN television on that night. So in this video, I will cover a lot more of what has been reported. So to start with, I'll give you a lot more detail or new details on the reported incidents for which he has been sentenced, and they are a little bit more graphic in areas. Then I'll move on to the court's views of Warren McCorriston's offences, his stated remorse and prospects for rehabilitation. I will then cover the key findings of his psychiatric report about his behaviour and a possible reason for it. Then I'll provide a bit more detail surrounding the sentences he has received. I'll give a summary of all this, including my opinion of it all, his brother, and even a bit of discussion of domestic violence in general. The latest media reports do give some more information on Warren McCorriston's offences. I'll start with an article from the Newcastle Herald the day after, being the 26th of June 2021. Now, so this is the article here. It's on page 5. So the bit about his offences begins. During sentencing on Friday afternoon, Judge Mark Marion described the rapes of the two women in particular, who cannot be named for legal reasons, as extremely serious, which were brutal offences in the extreme. The court heard that during an attack on one of the women, McCorriston bit her twice on the back, leaving teeth marks. On another occasion, with a different victim, he repeatedly punched her and then kicked her in the back while she was on the ground, leaving her needing hospital treatment for broken ribs and a collapsed lung. Judge Marion said it was a prolonged and brutal attack. Okay. I did find a number of other online news articles reporting on this, but most were essentially clone copies of each other. So I will refer to one in particular, the Area News, and it provides another perspective of these attacks. His crimes were inflicted in the course of domestic relationships, often unprovoked and physically violent, Acting District Court Judge Mark Marion said. One woman recalled how McCorriston, now 61, would oscillate weekly between giving her flowers and giving her bruises. She didn't say no every single time he raped her, but when she did, the offender would continue anyway. McCorriston finally ceased his attacks on her after a child shouted out, "What are you doing?" or "Get off her," as McCorriston tightly gripped his victim's throat and pinned her arms to the bed. With similar brutality and regularity, the offender scared another woman and ignored her pleas for him to stop. "You deserve to be punished and you deserve to suffer," he told her during one bashing. One rape came after McCorriston literally ripped her dress off and then hit her until she collapsed on the floor. In another, his blows broke her ribs, collapsed her lung, and left her crying on the floor, unable to fight him off. McCorriston only took her to the hospital after his victim promised to stick to his story. She'd fallen on cricket stumps. After I initially read the Newcastle Herald article, I was wondering why he wasn't charged at the time for that assault. But this article added a bit of extra detail saying he made her tell a different story. And it explains it. Okay, going back to the article, I'll now move on to the court's judgment. Judge Marion placed the offences among the worst of domestic violence offending. They were brutal offences in the extreme, totally unprovoked and displaying a wanton disregard for the innocent victims, he said. The agreed facts included matters for which McCorriston wasn't charged, indicating his pattern of physical and sexual abuse and assault against the two women. Okay, carrying on from that, I'll go back to the Newcastle Herald. And it talks a bit more about it here. He said, he being Judge Marion, he accepted McCorriston's displays of remorse, which included an affidavit, a letter to the court, and apologising to his victims from the witness stand as genuine. But Judge Marion said any assessment of the 60-year-old's prospects of rehabilitation should be guarded. An ABC News online article gives a different perspective and more details of the court's judgment. Judge Mark Marion said the domestic attacks were the most concerning. The offences of domestic violence are of a high order of seriousness, aggravated by the fact they were committed in the homes of the victims, in a sense of being totally unprovoked and him showing complete disregard for the innocent victims. The judge said the women had been forced to have sex against their will, held down and threatened. But he said offences against the first victim targeted at a train station were at the low end of the scale. Judge Marion said while the woman would have been terrified to be approached in the surf at a local beach and held near the railway station, he would deal with the matter with a community corrections order for 1 year. McCorriston took the stand and offered what he called a humble apology. Judge Marion said his remorse and contrition must be taken into account. The judge said he believed the remorse was genuine and noted McCorriston was never challenged by the prosecution about his claims. We now move on to the key conclusions of the psychiatric report. But he noted a doctor's report that said McCorriston was still troubled by episodic family violence and sexual entitlement and would need ongoing supervision in the community. The area news also commented on this with a little bit of additional information. A psychiatrist's report noted McCorriston's behaviour involving sexual entitlement and alcohol abuse was likely modelled on his violent father. This could also have some bearing on the alleged offences and charges against his brother too, which I'll discuss later in this video. But now I'll move on to details of his sentence. At the beginning of this video I did cover that he received an 8.5-year sentence for the offences against 2 of his victims. The Area News article adds, Judge Marion set a minimum term of 4 years and 6 months, saying McCorriston would need an extended period of supervision. He also placed the offender on a 12-month good behaviour bond for 2 separate assaults of a 17-year-old in Newcastle in 1980. Occurring as she walked alone to a train station and while in the surf at a local beach, the assaults both involved her arms being restrained and bookended a series of approaches McCorriston made towards the teenager. But whilst noting the victim's inevitable terror and stress, the individual offences didn't warrant jail time, the judge said. The Newcastle Herald also adds, McCorriston's sentence was backdated to January 2020, the time of his arrest, given he had been in custody since then. He was given a non-paroled period of 4 years and 6 months, meaning he will be first eligible for release in July 2024. So it appears he will be in jail for the next 3 to 7 years, as his sentence has been backdated nearly 18 months. But it does seem that he will have some difficulty in getting parole, and if he does, I imagine there would be some very strict conditions placed on it. Now, I had wondered whether the alleged offences against his brother did indicate there may have been some family issues involved in their upbringing that led to this behaviour, which I will point out is alleged in his brother's case. But if it does turn out that it is proven in court, then we have 2 brothers who commit similar violent crimes involving sexual offences. And if the claims in the psychiatrist's report that there was a violent history with their father, then that would pretty much show there was something to do with their upbringing that has led to this. But this wouldn't excuse such behaviour, and this has pretty much been confirmed in the judgment that has been received. Because many people don't follow the bad behaviours of their parents. Some actually even go the total opposite because of it. But unfortunately some do, and there was a 2006 TV commercial in Australia that did point this out. So here's a bit of it now.
It looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Have you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so.
Go back where you came from. Learn to speak English.
Go back where you came from.
So to summarise, the judge did consider that Warren McCorriston is remorseful for his bad behaviour, but at the same time sees his prospects for rehabilitation not being very good, and that he would need close supervision upon his release. The judge saw the offences against the 17-year-old in 1980 as being low level and did not consider a jail term appropriate, but has issued a 1-year community corrections order. So I don't know the details, but a community corrections order can put restrictions on the person's activities, their use of drugs and alcohol, and various other matters during that year. Now, as he'll be in jail for a while, I'm assuming that won't come into effect until his release, but I don't know that for certain. Now, I do consider it is possible that he is remorseful for his actions, and it does kind of fit in that it seems he would go into a violent, uncontrollable rage and commit these atrocities, and then afterwards apologise and say it wouldn't happen again, but unfortunately it did. So he may have intended he didn't want to do it again, but perhaps the behaviour's too entrenched and couldn't help himself. As it does seem he may have gained some control over his behaviour but still had issues with these matters. So even though this behaviour may be very entrenched in him, he now has plenty of time to attempt to resolve the issues. So hopefully he puts his time to good use. Now, to finish up here, I might play a little bit of the devil's advocate in the matter of domestic violence. I have noted that often when these matters are discussed, there seems to be a focus on doing things that are protecting the victim, which is appropriate, and a lot of the time this is aimed at putting restrictions or extra punishments on the offender or even potential offender. But I don't see that increasing the penalties and punishments are necessarily going to stop someone who just goes into a potential rage, because the last thing they'd be thinking about is what are the consequences. Their anger just overwhelms them. So I think we need to actually focus to a degree on the offender, because they have the problem, and how we fix that problem. So obviously there's something not going right up here, a mental issue of some kind, which is not an excuse, but it is something that needs to be dealt with. And I think a lot of these, not all, but a fair degree of these offenders or potential offenders know they're doing something wrong, or as for example in this Warren McCorriston's case, if we are to believe he's truly remorseful, then it appears he knows he's got a problem, something needs to be done about it. And it would be far helpful, I think, to try and nip these things in the bud. So some sort of programs need to be developed that increase the access for potential offenders to get help, that it be somehow made more acceptable that they do get help. Like, I suppose it is a male thing that you're not meant to ask for help, you're meant to deal with these things yourself. But obviously they can't. So I think when we identify these offenders or potential offenders who may escalate into more serious domestic violence, we should not only look at actions to protect the victim, but we should also look at actions to help the offender to deal with whatever's causing them to behave in this way. Now, there have been programs that have been developed in this way, but I don't think there's a lot of media or general attention given to it. Now, one of those programs is a thing called Mensline, and I'll just play you a recent TV commercial in that regard, and then I'll move on to finish off this video.
Tough times don't excuse tougher times at home. Even in crisis, there's no place for abuse or domestic violence. If you're worried about your actions or relationship, help is available online and by phone 24/7. For free confidential advice and counselling, contact Mensline. There's no place for abuse or domestic violence. Help is here. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
So I hope you've liked this video, and maybe have a look at some of my other videos and see what you think. So please subscribe, click on the notification bell to be notified when I upload new videos. If you really like these videos, perhaps you'd like to support me on Patreon. I'm David A. Elliott. Have a good one and see you around like a Rissole.